everyone, welcome back to Sips for Change. As always, we're here to bring you exciting conversations about making events more planet and people conscious. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Renee Rubin from Symphony of Leaves Tea to talk a little bit more about her journey to sustainable tea. With that, I wanted to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, Renee, and tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to explore tea as a sustainable and mindful beverage option?
Sure. Thanks. Thank you so much, Tammy, for inviting me and allowing me to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate it. So, my background, I was in media sales for the majority of my career for 30 some odd years. And I truly enjoyed it. It was a blessing. But I would say probably 15 years ago, I was actually introduced to premium quality teas. Um, so I'll say prior to my introduction, I was actually up in San Francisco and just meandering through Chinatown and came across this really lovely store. And the owner's son spent the afternoon introducing me to teas. But prior to that, I was getting my teas out of the supermarket in tea bags, right? So, and no shade against anybody who does that.
Yeah,
I
totally
just
fine.
learned, I was thankful to have learned that there were some definitely better options out there. So I kind of became fascinated with tea and I remember one day calling, I developed a relationship with the owner's son, and I called him one day and I'm asking him questions, and he said, "You do realize we only do Chinese teas, right?" And I said, "As opposed to?" And he's like, "There are tea producing countries around the world."
Yeah.
Um, and that of course sent me down this rabbit hole of looking for other really good quality teas. And what I started to learn, there was something to be said about the quality of the tea and how it was grown, right?
Mhm,
So I was,
mhm.
as I was enjoying this experience, I was just learning more and more about what made a good quality tea. And then fast forward, I would say, I had toyed with the idea of starting a business, but again, I was really enjoying what I was doing professionally. But COVID came along, and ding, 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 you need to start considering some other options. So it was time for me at that point to kind of hang up my shingles, so to speak, and start my tea company. But I knew early, just based on the experiences I'd had over the years, that what was in the best interest of my customers was to make sure that we were delivering really good quality teas. And like I said, that was definitely connected to and tied to, you know, teas that were grown responsibly.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that journey with us. And I love how you came to found and explore tea from just walking into a store, right? There's many times where I've stumbled across something and then it becomes my newfound passion. And so I love that for you. And I love that the owner of the store made pointed out and said, we just specialize in Chinese tea. Because I do think coffee is so prevalent and I don't drink coffee. I drink a lot of tea. And because,
Right.
my heritage and my family is Asian, so when I think tea, I always think Asian tea as well. Like Taiwan is
Mhm.
very known for great tea, and that's where my family's
Mhm.
from. And but like
Mhm.
you said, there are tea production countries all around the world, just like coffee, right? So
Right,
I
right,
love to
right, right.
hear a little bit more about the experience that you've had when it comes to sustainable tea sourcing and how that does that differ from conventional tea production and from the sustainable lens, why does that matter for planet and local communities when we're thinking about sustainable sourcing around tea?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So, like I said, I understood there was a connection between quality and, like organic or things that were grown a certain way. And so when I was starting the business, I was trying to make sure that I would be able to articulate what our value
Mm,
proposition is as a company and what would differentiate us from a lot of others, right? Typically or often in the States, tea has just become very commoditized,
Mhm.
right? So people expect to spend $2 or $3 for a cup, and then they add a lot of sweetener to it because they've gotten really not necessarily great quality tea. And I wanted to be able to tell the story not just from the perspective of the end of the journey with, in your cup, but
Mhm.
what the process was all the way through, right? So from what does it look like from the picker's level? And, what does that mean in terms of labor and our responsibility to ensure that people are compensated fairly for their labor? At the picker's level, more often than not, it's women, right? So we
Yep.
wanted to make sure that, in buying from us, from Symphony of Leaves tea, that you'd be able to get tea that was harvested responsibly, that was grown responsibly, and that was harvested ethically, and that people were paid equitably throughout the entirety of the supply chain.
Mhm.
There are times, I'll be perfectly candid, we're never going to be the least expensive tea option,
Yep.
but we do tell the story to people. As a matter of fact, I did a presentation earlier this week at the Atlanta History Center, and we were talking about, just the cost of
Mhm.
somebody actually using their hands to pick. You want to rely on the expertise of somebody who's looking at the leaves to make sure that those are the right leaves that are being picked at the right time
Mhm.
to process so it can yield a good white tea or a good green, a good yellow, a good oolong,
Mhm.
typically from Taiwan, or a good black tea or a good pu'er. So we we want our customers and our prospective customers to understand that it's not just about the end journey, that we look at, the UN says that most greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture, right? And
Mhm.
50% of the habitable world is agriculturally driven, right? So we have to be mindful, not just because I like tea, right? Because that's, I do love tea, but I think there's an opportunity, and the onus is on us to make sure that we are working with producers, farmers who are doing the right things in terms of diminishing or lowering their greenhouse gas emissions and growing responsibly. So we want our customers to understand, like, this is not just about the end product, it's the process all the way
Mhm.
through.
I think that's great that you highlighted the entire process, right? It's not just about the end product, it's about the entire journey from the picker through production of the tea and then the sourcing and then also the end production of the tea leaves itself to the consumer. From a sustainability perspective, from the event side, when we're talking about emissions and we're measuring emissions and scope, right? We discussed a lot of those pieces, and that's holistically managing your supply chain, right? And what we tell our event
Mhm.
planners to be really mindful about understanding your supply chain, those are all the pieces that you mentioned, right? Partnering
Yeah,
with farmers that are getting fairly, that's the recipient and being treated fairly and getting equitable payments and just making sure the
right,
environment's great for the product and also the labor workers as well. So I think it's really great that as a business, as an owner, you are thinking about the supply chain as a whole and you're educating your audience on why you're more expensive, right? Because at the end of the day,
right,
I personally
right,
believe that you do get what you pay for, right? When it comes to quality,
right, right,
there's plenty of
right,
people who will pay top dollars for a really great selection of coffee beans from, I don't know, I don't drink coffee, Colombia, like really expensive Colombia coffee beans. Um, or like a
mhm,
really expensive bottle of wine that is, that's cultivated in a particular way so that it brings out the aroma, the flavors, etc. So I do think that
right.
it's important when you highlight those things. Now,
Yeah,
from the,
it's a good point that you bring up.
mhm,
When I talk to companies, and I always say, kind of try to steer them to understand that, yes, tea has been commoditized, but I would encourage you to look at it the way you look at wine,
yeah,
right? That there's an entire spectrum of what's available in the quality of the tea based on how it's the cultivar and how it's been harvested to determine what you're going to experience in your end cup. So sometimes my friends and I in the industry joke, and it's like we're wine's poor sister, right? We don't get the same love that the wine is, but we're working on it, right? There are a number of us out here trying to tell that story about why it's important to understand, what tea really is about, and that you're looking at the leaves. It's aromatic and fragrant, and
Hmm.
it tastes good, and it does all of the things that you needed to do. Unlike wine, though, you are not going to become inebriated, so that's the good thing, right?
Yeah. And it's an acquired taste, right? Just like beer is an acquired taste, wine is an acquired taste, tea, etc. Like I didn't know anything about wine until I went to a sommelier and did a wine tasting and like got educated on the different types of wine that I can enjoy. And I think the same thing should be done for tea, right?
Absolutely.
And
Mhm.
so, looking at the consumer level, what are some easy ways that consumers can learn about the teas that they're buying, and especially whether or not they're ethically or sustainably sourced?
Yeah. So we, for example, we don't play in the bag space, right?
Hmm.
The bags tend to be not environmentally friendly, so we are always going to have loose leaf teas in our portfolio. So the first thing is, to look at the leaves, right? Just do they look overly dried out? Because if they're overly dried out, you're gonna lose some taste from them. Um, you want to be able to, smell how fragrant they are, right? There's sometimes we do when we're doing tea tastings and tea events, we will usually have a few samples out so people can feel what the leaves are like, and you can
Mm-hmm.
feel you know, some of the oil that's still left in the tea as it should be, because you don't want it to be overly dry. But what I would also say to people who are looking for good tea experiences, one, of course, I'm going to say go to symphonyofleavestea.com, but I'm also going to say, you know, talk to the purveyor and ask them if they can source map the ingredients. Where are they purchasing from, so that they'll hopefully be able to share with you who they've purchased from and how they've acquired those teas. And it hopefully helps you as a consumer feel better about making sure that you're purchasing something that was, like I said, grown responsibly.
Hmm. So I have another question, Anna, and you briefly touched upon it, but I figured let's kind of bundle this question together as well.
Mhm.
For our brands that potentially could be listening, how can brands or even consumers also think about reducing packaging waste in their footprint when it comes to purchasing and potentially gifting tea?
Yeah, so we did spend a lot of time thinking about that. There were some other packaging options that were probably more design or more visually appealing, but they weren't really as sustainable as I wanted them to be. And so I
Hmm.
wanted to stay true to that. Um, I think, there are a number, if somebody is starting a business, there are a number of industry conferences out there to attend, and you get the opportunity to talk with reps, or even just, make some phone calls, right? And talk with them about their packaging and what they're doing to make sure that their packaging is responsible and environmentally friendly. Many of the packaging companies out there, I've started to notice, are putting out what their carbon emissions are,
Hmm.
right? So it's information that's easily accessible. But, and this is a big but, there's a big caveat here. Like anything else, you're a marketer, you have a marketing background. You've got to ask the right questions, right? Because sometimes the stories that I hear make me want to spin my head around, right? Because it just doesn't, they're taking bits and pieces of information, but, just drill down, right? With when somebody says, oh, this is 100% sustainable. Well, what does that mean? Let's define sustainability from the perspective of your company, so that we're having the same conversation, that we're using the same language. Um, if they can't, there's another vendor out there who can.
Hmm.
Yeah, so talk to your salespeople who are selling your packaging, and ask the tough questions.
Yeah. And I will share this about Renee's brand because she didn't bring it up herself, but I've worked with Renee on ordering tea as gifts, and they come in these cylindrical paper-based containers that seal. And again, these are biodegradable, they're paper-based, no laminates. There's a sticker on the front, but ultimately, most of the packaging is going to be biodegradable, right? Like you said, you use they're
Yeah,
loose leaf
yeah,
teas. They're
yeah,
not in tea bags, where a majority of those tea bags are not
right,
biodegradable. So that is
right.
definitely a tribute. I wanted to highlight that for you, Renee, and I really enjoyed that
Thank you
about your
so much.
brand
I appreciate it. Yeah.
because when you
Yeah.
think
No, that
tea,
was really important for us. Yeah. That
yeah,
we want people to know that we try to live the things that we talk about all the way through as much as
mhm,
we possibly can. That's the goal, right?
yeah, and I thought it was beautiful. So, thank you so much for gifting tea in such a beautiful packaging that is sustainable. So you're
Thank
really
you.
walking the talk, so I really appreciate that. Um,
Thank you.
we have one more, we have time for one more question. So I think I'm going to end it
Okay.
by asking, why don't we talk about the tea tasting experience and tea tasting ceremonies? And for example, what is your perspective and suggestion on how that can feel special for utilizing at events, potentially making it a substitute from serving alcohol?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. So, um, when I started this business, I truly believed it was going to be a lot easier than it actually is.
Don't we all?
I thought it was going to be a cakewalk, and I was just going to do one, two, three, and it'd be, magically people would just be like, "Oh, this is wonderful." Not necessarily the case. Nope, that's not what happens. But the good thing is, we do a lot of tea blending and tea tasting experiences. We're fortunate enough to do like on a monthly basis. We do, I'm based in Atlanta. We do a tea tasting at Bloomingdale's, right? And so we get the opportunity to share with people what they should be actually experiencing, especially since we're an online company. So
Mhm.
they're able to, again, look at those leaves, they're able to smell the leaves, they're able to touch and feel the leaves. And so we get the opportunity to show them what they should be experiencing. And one of the things that's really important, and we always remind people of this at all of our tea tasting events, if, often people put a lot of sweetener
Mm.
in their teas, right? And there are a couple of reasons. One, because they're having broken tea leaves, and that emits a lot of astringency. So you're trying
Mm.
to camouflage the astringency. Now, there's some natural astringency, but not usually as much as you're, substituting with sweetener. The other part of that is, pending what type of tea you're drinking, you need to have the water at a certain temperature. Boiling
Ooh,
your tea is generally not a good idea, unless you're drinking a black tea, because a black tea is hearty enough, or a pour. Those are hearty enough and strong enough that they can withstand boiling water. We want
okay.
people to, taste the complexity of the tea. And the way you do that is to have your water at the right temperature. So, for example, if
Mm.
you're drinking like a very delicate silver needle, which is a white tea, typically comes out of China, you want that water no more than 170 degrees, right? And you don't want to oversteep it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't make any money from Cuisinart, but I always show people that I've had my loyal Cuisinart tea caddy for probably 15 years. And all you do is you,
Uh,
you put your water in, and you press or select the appropriate temperature so
yeah.
that your water heats to the temperature that's appropriate for the type of tea that you're drinking. What
Oh, wow.
happens when you drink, let's say, again, we'll use silver needle, which is a very delicate tea. It's only picked 1 week out of the year, right?
Wow.
It's very, yeah, so which contributes to why it is the cost. If you put that leaf in boiling water, it's almost like it's attacking it, right? And so the leaf can't withstand it. So you've already burned that leaf, and then you're going to want to put sweetener in it to camouflage the burn that you've made. So instead, put your water at the appropriate temperature, Steep it for your 3 to 4 minutes, right? Because then you also don't want to oversteep.
Hmm.
Um, and that way you'll have a better tea drinking experience, and you'll get to taste all of the different notes and characteristics of that tea. You'll be able to experience that, the delicacy of, something that's floral in nature,
Yeah.
right?
I love all of the things that you just mentioned, the notes of the tea, the florals. And those are descriptions we use to describe wine, right? Someone decided to come up with all of these different beautiful aromatic experiences and tastings for wine. And tea has that same level of complexity. And I love how you're pointing that out because I do think that tea is so underrated. I
Yeah,
definitely feel like there's so many flavors of tea out there. I did not know I should be
absolutely.
steeping certain tea leaves at certain temperatures, so that is good to know. Um, but yeah, I do think there's a lot of education there needs to be brought to the public when it comes to these experiences and tea overall because I personally love a good cup of tea with a dessert. I don't like
Mhm.
coffee or any other
Right, right.
or a glass of wine with my dessert. Like that's just too much, like too
There's
much
too much going on there.
flavor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Um,
so, anyway, and thank you, Renee, so much for joining us today. We're really honored that you get to share all of those great conversation topics with us today. So, thank you, our audience, as well. And if you like these conversations, make sure you hit subscribe and like below. And Renee, is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up today?
no, you know what? We are always open to answering any questions, right? So if people
Right.
just want to reach out, go to the website, send me an email. My phone number is there because I want this to be an accessible and inclusive experience. Feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being so open. And like I said, we'll include all of those resources in our descriptions below. Until next
All
time,
right.
keep making conscious choices one sip at a time. Bye.
Hi, Tammy. Thank you.